The NFL draft is the biggest event in the entire offseason, and with so many teams having so much pressure on them to have successful drafts, today let's talk about the 5 teams with the most pressure to have a good draft. So while I know every single team has to have a good draft, there are certain teams that just need it a little bit more. For example, a team like Kansas City doesn't necessarily have to have the greatest draft because, well, they already have a good roster. Same thing applies for teams like Dallas, Buffalo, Cincinnati, so on and so forth. Today's video is to highlight 5 teams that in my opinion have the most on the line in this year's draft. And we will begin with the New York Jets. The New York Jets have obviously Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, who is coming off a freaking torn Achilles. And with head coaches and coaching staff members who have been around for quite some time with nothing to really show for, the time to win now is here. And this is a Jets franchise that historically has not been very good at drafting, and that's even with Robert Saleh as the head coach. So in my opinion, for the Jets to not only be successful next year, but for a lot of these people to keep their jobs, there's a ton on the line in this year's draft. This is also highlighted by the fact that they haven't had a good first round pick in quite some time. Let's not forget the Zach Wilson pick, the Jamal Adams pick, the Mekhi Becton pick, and most recently, the Will McDonald pick. And what's so frustrating about the Will McDonald pick is he isn't really a position of need regardless of what happened this past year. What I mean by that is, sure, if he had a 10 to 15 sack season, that would be fantastic, but they needed offensive line and they needed wide receiver, and they didn't address those positions. So in this year's draft, if they don't look to address the offensive line or the receiving room, well, I gotta be honest with you, I don't really see how this team takes the next step. Because yes, they have talent on their team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. When it comes down to it, winning games is the #1 priority for this team. With Aaron Rodgers now the quarterback, next year fully healthy, this team has to win. And if this year's draft sucks, there's going to be some firings. And here's the thing, the New York Jets are essentially coming off of a rebuild. Now, they haven't really ever finished the rebuild, and they've always sort of seemed like they're in a rebuild, but this is the first time in a while at least that this Jets team has some sort of bright future. And that's due to the fact that they have good players on the defensive side of things, but offensively they just have never been able to get anything really rolling. And I think if you're a Jets fan or somebody within the Jets franchise, your concern level for this team moving forward has got to be immense. Because this team hasn't shown that they can be consistently good drafters. Yes, they took Sauce Gardner, and yes, they took Quinnen Williams, and sure, those guys worked out, but think of all the guys they drafted before them that did not work out. And in my opinion, this franchise has a lot on the line in this upcoming draft. Whether they take a pick or they trade the pick, it doesn't matter, they have to hit. The next team with a ton on the line is the Atlanta Falcons, and the main reason why is, well, they have to address the quarterback position. And whether or not they decide to do that in this year's draft is going to be the conversation that a lot of people are going to have. Do they go out there and try to get Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, Bo Nix? Hell, do they even try to trade up for a Drake May or Caleb Williams? To me, the Atlanta Falcons have a ton of roads they can go down. They can either trade for somebody, they can try to get someone off of free agency, or hell, they can try to get one in this year's draft. I think regardless of that, it is going to be the #1 story that the Atlanta Falcons have to address this offseason. Because here's the thing, if they don't address the quarterback position and next year they rock around with Taylor Heineke or Desmond Ridder or some B-list level quarterback, they're not going to be as successful as I think they can be. If you know anything about me, you would know that I thought the Atlanta Falcons last year would win the division, and I think moving forward, they should be consistently winning this division because of how talented they really are. And I think it would be a damn shame if they go into this draft without taking or having a quarterback on the roster who is better than Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke. And that's no shade to Taylor Heineke or Desmond Ridder, but it's very clear that they are not the answers. They could be backups, they could be third strings, but they are not the guy for this Falcons team. And here's the thing about this Falcons team, that's not really the only hole they have. They also need help in the edge rusher and interior defensive line room. Last year, this defense in the secondary and the linebackers room took some steps forward, and I want to see this team take even more steps forward by getting a dominant pass rusher. This is a Falcons team that at the end of the day has needed pass rushers for quite some time, and whether they do that in this year's draft or in the free agency period, I think they have to address that spot. I think best case scenario for the Atlanta Falcons is you already have an established quarterback in like Russell Wilson or Kirk Cousins or Justin Fields, and you can go out there and get a dominant edge rusher like a Danielle Hunter to add to your team. So that way, when you do enter the draft, you can go in there and take a guy like a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze or somebody to just add more firepower to this offense. Because if you're telling me that I can have Justin Fields or whoever at quarterback to go along with Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and a Malik Neighbors-like player, that team could be special. And I'm telling you now, watch out for the Atlanta Falcons if they listen to my advice. But let's go ahead and move on to the next team, and that is going to be the Arizona Cardinals. Similar to the Atlanta Falcons, I think the Arizona Cardinals have a pretty bright future, but I think a lot of it is on the line in this upcoming draft. This is a Cardinals team with a lot of draft picks, and in the first round, they have 2, with the biggest one coming at pick number 4. Now, here's the thing for the Arizona Cardinals. They're actually in very good shape to take a top 5 player in this year's draft. And to me, they're even in better shape when it comes down to going out there and getting, in my opinion, the best pure prospect in this year's draft in Marvin Harrison Jr. Assuming that the top 3 picks are quarterbacks, which seems pretty realistic, they're going to end up with the best wide receiver talent we've seen in quite some time in Marvin Harrison Jr. And for Arizona, if you can go out there and get Kyler Murray a ton of different weapons to work with, that could seriously prolong the time you have to work with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray has potential to be a top 10 quarterback, but he's never had good teams around him. And I think for the first time since Kyler Murray's been the quarterback, this is the first time that I actually see a silver lining for where they can go. This is the first time that I think they have a good head coach to go along with good pieces and good capabilities to be the team that they think they can be. So for Arizona, your number 1 goal should be to kill this year's draft. Obviously, I've been focusing on surrounding Kyler Murray with talent, but this team in general just needs a bit of everything, whether it's defensive line people, linebackers, safeties, corners, offensive line, running backs, which I'm just kind of going on and on now. They don't really need a running back, but you get my point. This is a team that could kind of just go best player available in all their picks, and that would seriously help this team. Because it's not like this team has a truly good cornerback or a truly good defensive lineman or this or that, but they have some talent in different places. So I think in this year's draft, if they can hit on 3, 4, 5 of their picks, it could really turn this franchise into something that could be kind of bright. Again, to me, their future's on the line, and if they take the wrong steps, it could get bad for this Arizona Cardinals team. Let's go ahead and talk about the Washington Commanders now. The Washington Commanders have the number 2 overall pick, and I think it's pretty obvious they're going to be taking a quarterback with their first round pick. And to me, I think regardless of who's available, I think Drake May should be the guy. To me, I think Drake May is the second best quarterback prospect in this year's draft, but I think he's a perfect fit with the Washington Commanders. And there's a couple reasons why the Washington Commanders have to kill this draft. For starters, they're entering into a new period of their time. This is now the Dan Quinn era, and we're now moving on from the Ron Rivera and all that other garbage they've been going through these past couple years. So for a team like the Washington Commanders, if you eventually want to compete in the tough NFC East, you're going to have to put it together, and I think it starts with this year's draft. This is not a Commanders team that is completely void of talent. They have good players in certain positions, but they're just kind of struggling in the major positions like offensive line, quarterback, edge rusher, so on and so forth. And I think with another year of development from Emmanuel Forbes, that could definitely help this defense out a lot. Now, the Commanders have a ton of holes. I've already talked about a couple of them, but the biggest one that has to be addressed is, of course, the quarterback position, and I think, again, that will be Drake May's spot. And I think if that's the case, I don't think it's that bad of a spot for Drake May to go through. I think for starters, he's going to get a ton of time to develop as the quarterback to go along with some pretty good weapons to surround him with. Now, the offensive line isn't very good, the running game isn't fantastic, but you have some guys here and there. So for Washington, very similarly to the Arizona Cardinals, you have the draft capital, you have the money. Now is the time for this team to take the proper steps to become the team we think they can be. And in the case of Colin Cowherd, potentially be the team to win the NFC East, which is a load of garbage. But before we get to my last team on this list, I want to give a special shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest and fastest growing fantasy sports app available. I know the NFL season may be over, however, Underdog has plenty of ways to entertain us while we wait for the new season. You may not know this about me, but I am a massive NBA fan, and with Underdog's Pick'em games, I can earn some serious cash. Simply pick higher or lower on 2 to 5 player stats, and you'll have a chance to win up to 20 times your money in a single night. I personally love playing these Pick'em games on game day to spice up my afternoon. And all you have to do is use the link in the description below to sign up today using promo code MetroSports, and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100 as well as an instant pick'em special. Check the map on the screen right now to see if your state qualifies, and I want to give a massive thank you to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. But now let's talk about the Chicago Bears. This is probably the most obvious team of all the teams I've talked about. The Chicago Bears have to hit on their first overall pick, whether it's through a trade or whether it's on Caleb Williams. Because here's the thing, the franchise is at a total divide when it comes to the fan base. Some people want Caleb Williams to be the guy, some people want Justin Fields. To me, it just seems like there's a lot of people who want different things, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they actually go down. Now for me, I'm big on Caleb Williams, and I'm big on taking a receiver or offensive lineman with your second first-round pick. Yes, I said that right. They have 2 first-round picks, and they're both top 10. So if you're Chicago, you have got to hit on your first 2 first-round picks, because if not, your franchise is, let's be honest, screwed. And similar to a lot of the teams on this list, this team has the talent to be damn good next year. Do I think they'll be better than the Detroit Lions or Green Bay Packers? Probably not, but I could see them contending for a playoff spot if they can hit on their draft picks. Just imagine an offense of Caleb Williams, or Drake May or Jaden Daniels to go along with DJ Moore, another receiver, and maybe a good offensive line. That could be scary, and that team could potentially make the run to make the playoffs. Now, I'm not going to throw my bid in there and say they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they'd be taking some nice steps moving forward, especially if they can keep guys like Jalen Johnson and add some pieces to this defense to make it even better. Hell, go out there and give a running mate with Montez Sweat. Go out there and develop your corners and your safeties and so on and so forth. I like the direction they're going down, but I think it all comes down to this year's draft. They have a big decision on their hands. Do you go first-round quarterback like Caleb Williams or Drake May, or do you go ahead and keep Justin Fields? And with rumors coming out that Justin Fields could warrant a first or second round pick, I tend to think it's going to be a second or third, but based off what I've been hearing, it could potentially even be a first. They would have even more weaponry to work with. Again, I'm going to throw my bid out there. Go get Caleb with your first overall pick. Go get Aroma Dunze or Malik Neighbors with your second overall pick, and look at that offense flourish. But like I said, every team has to have a good draft. It just so happens to be that these ones have the hardest task on their hands.